Food safety hazards and health risk. If we look at the food safety hazard, uh, there could be harmful substances. As I earlier said, they can be present in the food and they can be termed as hazards. And a substance is called as a hazard when it is likely to cause harm, injury, or illness when it is consumed by a person above a specific level or above a specific amount. So, whenever uh, that hazard or that thing that causes hazard, illness, or any problem in the consumer when used in a specific amount, this would be termed as a hazard. And these hazards can be classified into three categories. They can be biological hazards, chemical hazards, and physical hazards. And we will discuss these hazards in the coming lectures as well. If we look at the origin of these hazards or from where these hazards get into food, they might be different origin. They might come naturally from the food, by which I mean that they might be inherent in the food. They can be agent that form from deterioration or decomposition of food. So they are not naturally present, but they are produced during decomposition of food. And the third origin can be contamination from the hazard that can get into food from any other source during any operation such as harvesting, production, storing, processing, um, distribution, anywhere from which the hazard can get into the food system and contaminate the food or the food product. So there are many hazards that have been identified by the government and regulatory agencies, and they would set up limits for these hazards for which they must not exceed. And if they exceed those limits, the food must not be sold and it must be discarded. And as we earlier said, that Codex Alimentarius Commission, they have established acceptable level for a very long list of additives as well as pesticides or fertilizers or insecticides or any chemical or biological hazard. They have set up limits, maximum limits, uh, above which they should not go, so that the food is safe for the end user. In order to measure the risk, or in order to measure that at what level the hazard is more serious and it must be controlled and it should not go above a specific level, we need to do an exercise. This is called as risk analysis. And this risk analysis, it has to be conducted by national food and health authorities or regulatory agencies, and they should actually do some research work, as well as they can take up these figures, as I said, from the Codex Alimentarius Commission or from other available literature as well. So they need to do this risk analysis for every hazard, so that they can classify a hazard whether it is acceptable or not. So if we talk about the risk analysis, it would comprise of three steps. The first step is risk assessment. In case of risk assessment, we look at the hazard, how serious the hazard is, and how frequent this hazard is possible, and is it likely to cause any serious problem or not. So on that basis, we would assess the risk, whether it's a serious one, it's a alarming threat, it is very much potent threat, or it is something that is not likely, or it is something that is not very serious. So this first step is called as risk assessment. The second step is risk management. So that would tell you that how to minimize the risk, or how to maintain that risk under the specified boundaries, so that it does not cause any hazard. So it would be including all kind of practices that can reduce the occurrence of that hazard in food above a certain level. And the third step is risk communication. So once we know that there is a hazard present in a specific food at a specific stage, and that can be serious, and then we know that how we can control that hazard. or how we can control the conditions in which that hazard does not go far beyond that acceptable limits, then this must be communicated to the food industry, to the operators, and the people in the field so that they know that they have to control this hazard. So, the primary objective of risk analysis is to establish a national food safety objective. So, this is called as meeting this national food safety objective when we measure, when we do this risk analysis practice. So, the food safety objective, if we talk that what it is basically the maximum frequency and concentration of a hazard in a food at the time of consumption that provides the appropriate level of protection from the hazard. So they in the this objective we would define the concentration and the frequency at the time of consumption at which it does not cause it does not cause harm. So it can be considered as in other words we can say that this is the maximum acceptable level of a hazard in the food. So hazard analysis, as we earlier discussed, it is the first principle out of the 7 principles of HACCP system, and it is initially done to perform health risk involved with any kind of hazard that we are considering at any stage. For example, it can be at the time of processing or handling, storage, distribution, or any other subsequent steps before the food is consumed. So once we have this food safety objective of a hazard that has been established, then it is considered as the next step for HACCP system. So HACCP system again, as I earlier said, it start with the hazard analysis, and once we have this hazard analysis, then we need to look at another 6 principles of HACCP system in which we would try to minimize that hazard to an acceptable level so that when the food it goes into the market, it does not have any safety concerns. So this was about food safety hazards and health risk that can be associated with different kinds of hazards in food.